Hello and welcome to the Joe Ligato Show. I'm your host, Dr. Joe Ligato, and today we're going to be talking about reviewing an article from Politico on how countries are pushing back against the United States anti-China tech policy. This is by Mark Scott and Brendan Bordelon. Okay, so officials from the European Union, Malaysia, and Singapore. Okay, so you have at least two continents, the European continent and the Asian continent, various countries throughout that are skeptical about the United States' effort to cut China out of the global high-tech trading system, expressing reluctance to join Washington as it works to throttle the rapid expansion of the world's second largest economy into a global technology power. So, by some metrics, China is already actually the world's largest economy. And the metrics where they are the world's largest economy are metrics I actually prefer. I think the metrics showing that they are the second largest economy are really just like financial magic, accounting magic to show various things that America is doing well at still. But really, it's just numbers in a book. Tangibly, China is doing better, and the individuals within China are doing better than Americans are on an individual basis. So things like purchasing power parity, China is simply doing better. It's interesting that Malaysia would have some say here about United States efforts against China. Malaysia, I don't particularly consider to be a major power in the technology arena. I do think that they put together some manufactured goods, but aside from that, I don't consider them a major power. Obviously, the European Union is still, although they've been in decline. And Singapore is a major business hub throughout all of Asia. So that makes sense as well. Here we see, speaking at Politico's Global Tech Day on Thursday, David Koh, chief executive of Singapore's cybersecurity agency, said his country had grown rich because of its open economy and would continue to build ties with China. So, Singapore is its largest ethnicity is Chinese people. However, Singapore as a nation has really been, I would say, fairly westernized. They have a deep affinity for Western powers, and they kind of look down upon mainland China, I would say very similarly to how Taiwan does and how Hong Kong does. And so hearing them say that they are still interested in building ties with China, despite their kind of, I would say, elitist aversion to mainland China, to a certain extent, obviously, that tells you that China is extremely important throughout the trade of many nations throughout the world, including obviously Singapore here. So it goes on to say, Lucilla Scioli, a senior official within the European Commission's DG Connect, added that Brussels would continue to work with Beijing, even as some European countries become increasingly wary of potential economic dependencies on China. So, like, I don't particularly understand that. There are far more reasons to be concerned with economic dependence on the United States after World War II than there is economic dependence on China, because China does not have any historical precedence for being a colonial power, harassing other nations. They've been very introspective. They've looked internally. And the only times they really interact and engage with the rest of the world is when they want to trade with the rest of the world. They have a certain philosophical bent, they have a certain moral compass towards win win cooperation. And there's really no reason to be concerned about being dependent on them for an industrial base, for a manufacturing capacity, like you would America. If you are afraid of becoming dependent on China, but weren't afraid of becoming dependent on America, I'm talking to these European powers here, then that tells me that you have a certain bias. That bias could be because of racial reasons, because America is a historically white Christian nation. But it could also simply be the fact that these nations, European nations, are completely beholden, completely dependent on the United States and have lost their autonomy, which I think describes most of the people who are concerned about Chinese dependence on China. Okay, what else do we have here? I guess another thing I would like to say about that paragraph is countries should, as much as possible, not be dependent on other countries. Like, I remember tutoring a political science class, and the textbook was just all this fluff, kumbaya stuff about how important it is to have uh, certain trade advantages over other countries, but because every country needs every other country, you can't really have competitions between countries. And I thought that was just such a naive fantasy world where there wouldn't be competition. People wouldn't use their own country's benefits to gain leverage over other countries. It just wasn't realistic at all. It was extreme wishful thinking. And China recognizes this. China recognizes for things that are of core interest to their own country, then they need to have autonomy. They need to have independence over those supply chains. And every other country should be in the same boat. And quite frankly, China would help you be in the same boat. But most countries in the world don't know how to do that because they've been dependent on the United States for so long. So now we're getting into Malaysia. We were just talking about Singapore. For Malaysia, China is an important trading partner, added Fahmi Fadzil, Malaysia's communications and digital minister, who was also speaking at the event in London. Okay, so that is how Malaysia was included in this conversation. They were a part of the Global Tech Day. I was a little bit confused because I just don't consider Malaysia to be a country that I would consider to be a major stakeholder, a major participant in this type of conversation, but they were at the event, so that's why they're being listed. Malaysia is a neutral country. We do adhere to a free market policy. The comments come as American officials, both within the United States, such as President Joe Biden's administration and Congress, are urging their global allies to take a more skeptical stance towards Chinese technology. That includes attempts to sideline Beijing within the fast-growing telecommunications and semiconductor industries, as well as potential limits on how artificial intelligence is being embedded in societies worldwide. Okay, so there's so much to comment on here. This article was really supposed to be a 3 to 4 minute read, but I have so much I could potentially say here. So, one, going off of that first sentence in the paragraph, the American officials are having virtually no success in terms of getting allies on board with sanctioning China. When it came to the Russian special military operation, I think they had more success than I was expecting rallying European powers, because European powers have been hesitant of the United States for a while now. They were really hesitant to a large extent for the Iraq war and things like that. And so when it came to the Russian war, which is really what this is, it's a war against Russia, I was expecting them to also be very hesitant. But the United States managed to rally the troops, especially in Europe, for the war against Russia. But they're having very, 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 very minimal success in terms of rallying the troops to take on China right now. And so that first sentence, looking at the objective results, they've been largely unsuccessful. I'll get into a little bit more about that in the next sentence. So it goes on to say that includes attempts to sideline Beijing within the fast-growing telecommunications and semiconductor industries. Okay, so fast-growing telecommunication companies, there's been some success in terms of pushing companies, I believe it was Huawei, out of 5G communication infrastructure across the world. Huawei, other 5G companies were looking to implement 5G, and it just was not allowed by America. And so America was largely successful in terms of crippling China's 5G economic dominance, at least abroad, Domestically, obviously, China has a thriving 5G infrastructure. I believe it's the best 5G infrastructure in the world. In terms of semiconductor industries, for the longest time, we expected it would take another decade or two for China to grow into a mature semiconductor power because some countries, like America, still suck at building semiconductors. It's completely reliant on places like the Netherlands for the technology, and then places like Taiwan and South Korea for the actual semiconductor chips. And so the thought of China being able to create a lot of the semiconductors necessary for its domestic needs and then compete on the international economy when it comes to semiconductor chips, people just thought, the majority of people just thought that it would take decades for China to do that. Well, China has already breached mass production of 7 nanometer semiconductor chips, and there's already some evidence that they could get down to 2 nanometer chips. And 2 nanometer chips, if I remember correctly, is like one generation away from like the top tier commercial success. That might even still be considered commercial success, the top tier of commercial success. And so, in terms of both telecommunications and semiconductor industries, China has far exceeded expectations, and they've been able to completely, or at least mostly, circumvent any trade sanctions from the United States and its lackeys. In terms of artificial intelligence, China has at least one major advantage here. Well, I guess you could say two major advantages. One is its population, where if you want to train an artificial intelligence, in the vast majority of cases, you are training the artificial intelligence on human behavior in order to make sure it's doing things correctly, or at least correctly from the perspective of human beings. And because China has the second largest population in the world, it has a large body of people, a large amount of behavioral data that can be used to train artificial intelligence, particularly because they are collecting vast amounts of behavioral people data. The only country that probably comes close is the United States. I don't know the specific numbers comparing the two, but because the United States has, in some ways, deeper usage of electronics technologies. I don't even know how accurate really that is anymore, but they just have more technologies, more ways of, I would even say, surveilling their own people, that the United States is actually pretty good at collecting and analyzing and replicating people data. But China just has the advantage in terms of just absolute amount of people that you could extract people data from, and they're getting better at actually doing the extraction of people data as well. So this entire paragraph here just shows the inadequacy of America when it came to its competition, its great power competition with China. We go on to this second to last paragraph here. Ko, the Singaporean official, said that he did have security concerns associated with Beijing, but he said the policy of de-risking, now Washington's preferred term for its efforts to separate China from the global trading system, particularly around high-tech industries, was also troubling. Our concern is that de-risking taken too far will affect the current status quo. So de-risking is another way of saying that America is scaling back its trade sanctions because of the fact that the trade sanctions they've implemented so far, the many rounds of trade sanctions that they've implemented so far, it's been largely unsuccessful so far. And so they're having to scale it back and go to de-risking, which is where they really just try to make sure that China doesn't have access to strategic technologies. But those strategic technologies, China is able to create just as many, if not more, strategic technologies that they could restrict access to if they wanted to as well. I believe it was 37 of 44 most important technologies in the world. China has the most publications on. So China is just ahead in terms of understanding the most important technologies for being a great power in the 21st century. Scioli, the European official, claimed the 27-country bloc was trying to, that should be the European Union official, trying to reduce its over-reliance on technology supply chains, mostly from Asia, that had come under immense pressure during the recent coronavirus pandemic. The thing is, if you're reducing over-reliance on technology supply chains from Asia, you have to replace it with something. And right now, there are no other competitors that you could replace it with. Europe is clearly not going to rely on itself for technology. European countries are very waning powers, I would say. But the Italian added the EU would maintain some form of relationship with China, all while upholding its democratic values at a time when the geopolitics around digital policymaking was becoming increasingly heated. We want to work with China as an economic power, she said. Okay, so that is our article from Politico on countries' pushback against U.S. anti-China tech policies. So Politico is one of those newspapers, one of those media venues that I would say is very pro-American. And so if you're seeing an article like this in a very pro-American news outlet, media outlet, then that tells you that America's policies, their current trade war, is not particularly successful right now. And this is something that you should believe even more than if you read it in, say, a Chinese or Russian news source, because of the source being so pro-American, pro-West. So hopefully you learned something from that. That is the end of the article. Thank you for sticking with us. If you like this analysis, this commentary on the article, please provide us an upvote and subscribe to our channel as well. I also read all the comments in the comment box. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns, please put that in the comment box, and I would love to interact with you. So thank you for your time, and thank you for sticking with us. I hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye.